Welcome everybody to the Chess Lab, welcome to episode 9 of Endgame Mastery. So we are basically keep going with this series where we are studying endgames that according to International Master Jeremy Silman should be appropriate for Class A players, meaning players that have a rating between 1800 and 2000. I have a rating between 1800 and 2000 because FIDE I have 1972. However, I'm going to study also the expert section and the master section that are far beyond my scope. So if you guys have a lower rating or a higher rating or whatever, I would just encourage you to keep following these videos, keep following the series to get maximum value from the whole thing. If you really want to get maximum value, you should buy this course and grind on Chessable using the space repetition, the chapter that are exactly your rating, right? All you have to do is you go on Chessable, you click here and you search Silman Endgame or Silman, Silman. Okay. Anyways, so what did we do in the previous episodes though? Let's try to recap. So first of all, we went through King and Pawn Endgame's strange races. So we looked at a situation where it may seem like one color is winning, but it turns out it's a draw. Or it seems like it's a draw, but somehow it's winning, right? And we looked at this, and it's all about the race of the pawn in very simple endgames with just the kings and one or two pawns. Then we looked at king and pawn against king and pawn, and we saw some examples. And then we switched to rook endings, right? So we looked at the Lucina position with a rook pawn, and then we looked at what if the rook is in front of the pawn when the pawn is a rook pawn. And we looked at the fact that the ideal position for a rook in these rook endgames when a passed pawn is present is behind the passed pawn. Then we switched to even more complex things, and as you can see I had some trouble even just doing the moves after I saw them, because it was really confusing to me. I was also very tired yesterday. I'm more rested today, even though I'm tired even today, but yesterday was really tough. And that was it basically. So that was a rook in front of a rook pawn on the 6th rank, right? And now we are looking at rook rook and pawn against rook, and the pawn is either on the 4th or the 5th, and it doesn't specify whether it's a rook pawn or a knight pawn or a bishop pawn, so we're just gonna assume it's whatever pawn. And these lines are key, and then there's gonna be bishop of opposite colors, and then there's gonna be fortress in bishop endgames, and then there's gonna be queen endgames, and then there's gonna be the test. So today may be the day that we conclude this chapter, but I'm not sure, because tomorrow I have to wake up relatively early and to go to the gym, to eat and then go to the gym, so I don't want to really fuck it up, and so I may go. But anyways, for the time being we are here, let's study some chess. So rook and pawn on 4th or 5th versus rook. So we have already determined that the game is easily drawn if the defending king can get in front of the pawn, for example using the Philidor position as shown in part 4. However, what happens if the defending king is strapped one or more files to the side of the pawn? Okay. The result of this endgame depends on whether or not the stronger side I have to clean my nose again. Unfortunately, this time of the year is like you have to regulate clothing very well, because if you misregulate clothing, you get sick. It's either too hot or too cold all the time. It's so annoying. Anyways, what was I saying here? The result of this endgame depends on whether or not the stronger side can reach a Lucina position. And this is determined by the following specific rules. As usual, rook pawns form exceptions, so we'll only explore positions with a knight pawn, bishop pawn, or center pawn. Okay. So, rules. Rule number 1. A pawn on the 5th or beyond wins if the defending king is cut off by one file on the long side of the board. So if the pawn was on f5, I think it means that the king has to be either on the d file or beyond, but if he's on the h file, that may be different. I think that's what it means. A pawn on the 4th rank wins if the defending king is cut off by 2 files. Okay. A knight pawn is an exception and takes 3 files. Okay. These rules are also weird. It feels like it's all about pure calculation, but there's gonna be some interesting maneuvers to observe. So let's evaluate this position. We are looking at it from the white perspective. We are going up the board. And we have a passed pawn on g5. We are up a pawn. We're playing with white pieces, obviously. We want to promote in the square where the black rook is. And the black rook is not ideally placed because it's not behind our passed pawn. And the black king is cut off one file from the pawn. So I think this should be winning technically, right? Let's see. The position we see here is a good illustration of our 5th rank rule. A pawn on the 5th rank or beyond wins if the defending king is cut off by one file on the long side of the board. White easily achieves a Lucina position because black's king is on the long side of the board. Now it's time to address the long side and short side of the pawn. The short side is the side with the least amount of squares from the pawn to the side of the board. So that would be like the h file and beyond, except there's no beyond. The long side would be everything else, right? In general, the defender should always move his king to the short side of the pawn. Placing the defending king on the short side is extremely important. The point is that the defending rook can use the long side for long-distance checking, known as checking distance, without having to worry about his king getting in the way of these checks. Okay, very interesting. By blasting the enemy king with long-distance checks, the well-guarded king won't be able to find shelter, since approaching the nasty rook would entail a long trek that completely abandons the battle zone. So in this position here, king to h5, preparing to advance the pawn. If black does nothing, white will win easily by g6, king h6, g7, king h7, and that's it. So check, king g6. Threatening to play king g7 and g6. So rook g8, check, king h6. You ideally want to go to h7, but you will lose the pawn. So you go to h6. Now check again, otherwise you would just play g6, g7. King g7, and now all of a sudden there is no rook g8, check. So rook to h1, and now g6. Now after rook g1, after g6, if rook to g1, else white will play king g8 and g7, there is king h7, which simply threatens to promote, king e7, g7, king h1, king g8. White has a basic Lucina position, which, as you know, is an easy win. Yeah, except, really? Well, I assume that you just check and move the king here, but I'm not too sure. In a pawn down, yeah, I don't know this from white now. A rule, in a pawn down rook endgame, where the defending king can no longer stay in front of him, I have to read this. So in a pawn down rook endgame, sorry guys, but I'm tired. I'm really, like, you need to understand, I'm really trying to push some chess knowledge through my brain this week, because this week I work the afternoon shifts, which for me are much worse because I never have time to do nothing. I don't know why. The amount of hours should be the same, is not somehow. and I'm really trying to push through some chess into my brain, but it's like it's not gonna be optimal. But again, perfection kills progress. But you're gonna see me struggle way more than usual. You're gonna be surprised. It's gonna be like, is this guy a different guy? In a way, yes. In a way, yes. So don't be too surprised. Like it's normal if I don't understand basic sentences and I have to read it like 5 times. It's normal, believe it or not. So, anyways, in a pawn down rook endgame, where the defending king can no longer stay in front of the enemy pawn, the defender should always move his king to the short side of the board so that his rook will have checking distance. Okay, I finally understand, almost. But here is the thing. We have introduced a very important concept here, which is the short side of the board and the long side of the board. These are concepts that may end up useful in other situations. I don't know, I have this intuition, but I'm not sure. So here we just keep going up. Okay. That was easy. What? Silman, come on, man. For real? That was easy. I'm just reading, guys. I dissociate myself from this, but I have to read it. That was easy. But be careful that the defending king really is cut off. This is almost identical to our previous position, which was 1 for white. However, the almost proves to be very important. Instead of being on e6, black's king resides on e7. So there is rook f8. Also, black has the move. This allows rook f8, when suddenly it's clear that black's king wasn't cut off at all. Now rook takes f8, and if you move the rook away, the king just goes through, and if you allow the rook to be defended by the king, you just take it and then get the opposition, so you really have to take. King takes f8 is a dead draw, while rook a7, king f7, and the king is no longer cut off. Gets the king in front of the pawn, achieving a drawn position. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna have to redo this whole book once I finish, because that's crazy. And before the expert side and the master side, I may have to redo everything, because I realize that even the very basic endgames that he mentions, I'm like, I don't know. So anyways, let me check what time is it. Yeah, I have to take the pasta off the thing. I'm not even gonna stop the video. You guys can skip. If you're on the phone, just double click on the right side of the screen, and it skips seconds after second. If you're on your keyboard, just use the arrow. Just skip the time that I'm not talking and doing chess. Just ignore me, you know. Just skip. All right. Because I'm recording from the kitchen, that's even easier to do for me. So what I'm doing today, guys, is some pasta with pesto, and I have to do this. Pasta with pesto will be because, well, that's what we have today. Okay, so I have my pesto here. I'm gonna try to put it into the pasta without like putting it on the keyboard. That would be very annoying. Pesto is basically oil with some green leaves somewhere. And, you know, the world is going to try to convince you that no, pesto is actually something by itself. And it's like, nah, don't fall for the traps. Don't fall for the government propaganda. Pesto is not real, guys. Pesto is not real. This is my conspiracy. You know, everyone these days have their conspiracy theorists. This is my conspiracy theory, like pesto is not real. It's just marketing gimmick of the government. Change my mind. And you're probably wondering, like, are you joking, right? But here's the thing. Of course I'm joking. However, can you truly prove that pesto is real? Right? Can you really prove it that it's not just oil with some green leaves? Now you may argue that in the pesto there is things that is something rather than oil and green leaves, but we are just players. We're not supposed to, like... well, actually, we are supposed to have critical thinking, unfortunately, so I can't even finish that sentence. But, so yeah, good. You argued well. Now, unfortunately, the thing to open pesto lately has been really annoying. Like, usually it opens automatically. But now, like, you open it, and it just stays in your hand. It doesn't open the thing. And so you have to do, like, you have to use, like... You can't use your hands, because otherwise the oil just goes everywhere. That's the problem. So you have to do some bricolage. Which is also annoying. It's just less annoying than using the hands, I guess. 3 likes and I'm gonna do a kitchen video. I'm joking, because I get 3 likes in these videos. I'm joking, I'm not gonna do that. But that would be funny, like, Italian YouTuber remembers that he's Italian and not just a chess player, and makes a cooking video. Huh? Huh. Take that, government. I also have marketing gimmicks ideas. Okay. So it should be fine. You have to say that you're fine, but you're not really fine. I don't understand. Ah. We almost got the specialty oil on the cable, but we didn't. And then they say, you know what they say? Oh, study Endgames is boring. Well, try to study Endgames while you're cooking pasta al pesto. Take that, government! You know, I can say these things not because this is democracy and we are free, but because there is no mental asylum open anymore. Otherwise I couldn't say these things. Sorry, but I have to check what's behind my computer so that I can move it. Okay, let me move it, sorry. You're gonna see my beautiful microphone, that is my phone, because that's the fancy setup I can allow myself. That's not true, I have a full-time job, bro. I could buy a fucking microphone if I wanted to. I have the money finally to buy something. But here's the thing. setting it up is annoying. And then you notice one day I'm in the kitchen, one day I'm in my room, one day I'm in the other room, one day... It's like... You know what I mean? Like... It's like... That would be... I could buy an actual microphone, but that would be... How do you say it in English? How do you say it in Italian? What am I trying to say? Logistically, yeah, here we go. Logistically, it wouldn't be quite optimal. Okay, so now I'm gonna take some... I'm gonna, you know, mescolare. How do you say mescolare in English? It's like you have tomato sauce and you put it on the pasta, but it's like you have to mix it up. Mixing it up, here we go. I'm mixing the pasta up with the pesto. You know? So it turns out this pesto here, which is the pesto I always take, is one of the local favorites. Okay, no one cares. Let's go. Okay, so. But the problem is I'm reading and I have to eat, so that's gonna be a little bit. Okay, so guys, this is gonna be very annoying for you, but I'm not gonna read this because I have to eat. But I'm gonna read it in my mind, just not out loud. And it's not even etiquette, you know? It's like I can do it. So, you guys have to read by yourself. So, we are trying to defend here, Black is trying to defend, and Black is on the short side. So let's see. Rook h8, because remember what he said, check from the distance, right? So, check, check. So if you move the rook, the king comes closer and it's a basic draw, and otherwise you just keep checking. Yeah. Yeah, that was also okay. Yeah. Yeah. Rook d1, king c5, and it's a draw. Yeah, so basically this is very interesting, right? So you either check from the distance, and if the white rook moves to block the distance checks, you just come closer with the king. Check, check, king f6. If you go king f4, rook d5, and it's GG. But if you go king f6, check, here, and that's a draw. Yeah. Okay, that's nice. We learned it. Okay. So now again we are defending. We are going up, meaning, but we have no pawns, so they're going down. White is going down. And, you know, White wants to promote the pawn. So here we are talking about a pawn on the fourth. So let's see. Earlier we stated that the pawn on the 4th rank wins if the defending king is cut off by 2 files. The position shown here is drawn because the defending king is only cut off by 1 file. Technically the king though is on the long side, but again it doesn't matter, right? So king f4. Tempting e5 seems strong. Since rook e8, king e4 takes us to our first rule. A pawn on the 5th rank or beyond wins if the enemy king is cut off by 1 file on the wrong side of the board. That would be the case. However, instead of the compliant rook e8, black answer rook a4 when white's king is cut off from its pawn. Now, moves that take the white rook off the d file allow king d7 with an immediate draw. So for example, check king c7 also leaves white without a good follow-up, of course, and instead rook d4 takes a draw king and pawn. Endgame. Thus, after e5, rook a4, e6, now white threatens to win by e7, rook a8, rook to d8, okay, but king c7, stopping the aforementioned possibility of e7 followed by rook d8, and after e7 there is rook a8, and rook e8 and it's going to be a draw. So rook d7 check, king c8, rook h7. My ear just got unlocked. But now king d8, and it's a draw. King d8 I would have played it myself. If you play king d3 instead of rook to d1, there's rook a6, and now that's a draw. Okay. Unbelievably enough, I'm kind of understanding. So, king f4, now there is check. This frontal check defense is quite effective against a pawn on the 4th rank. Okay. So again, frontal check defense is something that we never saw, but again, this is very different. Like we never saw the pawn on the 4th, right? So you know that's a little bit annoying. So this is why it works. If the pawn, this is like the first line we saw, but we were the opposite color and we were winning. If the pawn was on e5, so on the 5th and not on the 4th, white will play king f6, and after we check them again, king e7. However, if they play king f6 now, we just take the pawn. Meaning the idea would be king f8, sorry, king f6, rook f8, king e7, right? But if they go king f6, they're not defending the pawn, so we just win it because it's one square behind. Below, before, behind. English is difficult, bro, if you don't speak first language. So rook f8, king g5, of course, but now rook e8. Again attacking the pawn, so it cannot push. And if they move behind with the rook, you just move closer with the king. But now rook g8 check because of king f6, and now they can actually advance. On check there is king e7, so they achieved the position we saw. And on rook e8 they can push e5, and now they're on the 5th and they win. Also note that rook h8 doesn't give black enough checking distance, because black's king is on the long side. So e5, check, king g5, rook e6. On rook h8 there is e6, and then king f6, I guess. And on rook e6, king f5. Rook e8, e6, this wins. Yeah, because we're back to the first position. The annoying attack against e4, we are here. Freezes the pawn in its tracks and forces white to lose time defending the pawn. This is crucial. This is crucial, and I think I'm kind of understanding, believe it or not. I must be allergic to something, quite frankly. I genuinely think so, because there's no way. I have to be allergic to something. I just thought about something, because, you know, it doesn't matter. It's about allergies, but it doesn't matter. Let's stay focused. So rook e8, king f5, check, and now rook e8 again, and now rook d4. That's the only shot. Threatening king f7. Rook e5, king f6, rook e8, e5. On rook e1, king d6, exactly. So rook d4, but now king c5. A very important resource. Note that if our original position had started with black's king on c7 instead of c6, this move wouldn't be possible and the result would be very different. So check. The king goes here, check. King e5. The alternative, king to g4, also forces black to use some care. Sorry, I'm not understanding what the fuck is going on. So check, you just go back, here, check. On king g4, well, of course, yeah, you go back, we express that, check. And now rook a8, whoa. Rook to f7 on e5, king d7, yeah, drawn feeder. King d6, king f5, now checking distance, I guess. And now you go here even. On check, you just get the position. That's crazy. But okay, king e5, check. Rook e7, wild move. And on e5, rook d7. Yeah. And that's just opposition. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so let's see if I remember the moves here. I think check is the right thing to do, like checking in front. And now though I have to touch the pawn. And now check again and touch the pawn. And now I attack this rook. I was about to say this bitch, but thankfully I didn't say it out loud because YouTube wouldn't like it. Wait. Okay, so if we start with black's king on c7 instead of c6, so same position, white's going down, we are going up, but we don't have a pawn, so we're trying to survive. The king c7 resource is missing with white to move. Black to move draws into different ways. So white to move will win for white, but if it is black to move, then we have king c6, and we go back to that resource, which takes us back to the previous exercise, or rook d8, and this is like a draw. White to move wins because he can take advantage of the fact that black no longer has the king c5 defensive idea at his disposal. There is no key, but let's put it in. So king f4, rook f8, king g5, rook e8 is the same thing, right? Is the same thing, but now king f7 just in time. On king c5 there is check, which is GG. So we have to play rook e5, but now king f6, and after rook e8, e5. And they're on the fifth. Our king is cut off by one side, on the long side of the board, so we are lost. Very nice. I mean, terrible, but... Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the allergy thing, because here is the thing. You know, there was a moment, this is something that, you know, my mother told me this one day, which she has allergies, and she didn't when she was a child. But one day, because of decoration, the city imported some plants from outside, and from that moment she had allergies. Now, one day, coincidentally, I took a book from the library, and it was like the history of medicine, but it was a very beginner-friendly book. It was a very easy read, very very easy. Don't imagine a tome or something. A very easy read. And at some point, it talked about the invasion of America by the Europeans, during the Middle Ages or whatever age it was. Well, technically not Middle Ages. I think it's technically the modern age, but whatever. You know what I mean. So, it was talking about the fact that, how did such an amount of population, the Aztecs, the Incas, and all these guys here, die from the Europeans? Was because the Europeans had better technologies and all that? Well, no one truly knows too well what happened, but one of the big hypotheses is that when a population is virgin, medically speaking, it means that it has never entered in contact with certain types of infections, perhaps, or other diseases, right? And so what most likely happened is that when the Europeans enter in contact with those indigenous populations, viruses and other type of diseases just spread. And since they were, again, virgin populations when it comes to those diseases and stuff, they didn't have the tools in their bodies to protect themselves against that. And so they just got decimated, right? These are all hypotheses, of course, but that's quite likely. It's a very decent possibility. And so what I just realized is with the fact that there is globalization and there are products going everywhere to everywhere, from everywhere and everywhere, and changing hands from place to place to place to place, it's what's going on basically a daily basis, and it's happening to everyone and every population ever, is that plants, but also I wonder how many other type of things, simply enter in contact with you, and your genes and the genes of many people before you never enter in contact with those things, because those things are on the other side of the world, right? And things didn't travel like they travel today. These are all hypotheses, obviously, guys. But I think we are all kind of we all have some type of allergy because of these reasons. It makes actually a lot of sense. I don't think there is a single person I know that has zero allergies. And some people in some moment of the year, they sneeze like crazy and they call it a flu because they don't want to admit they have allergies, but it's an allergy. It's everyone has crazy allergies today. Literally everyone. That's crazy. That's just crazy. So yeah, I think that's perhaps the reason. At some point in your life, you're gonna enter in contact with something that you're not genetically predisposed to have a defense against. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Sorry guys if I'm not reading, but I'm eating the pasta. But like, look at this. Like, in this position, there's only one way to draw. This is crazy. So rook g7. Okay, I can understand this. Rook a8, g5, and he just wins. Okay, because now he's on the 5th, I guess. But I don't know. On king d4 is the most interesting blunder since it allows white to cut the black king off on a rank by rook e6. And after king d5, rook h6. That's crazy. Suddenly black's game is lost. His king can't get back into the fight since the 6th rank is a no-pass zone, and the white rook blocks all checks along the h file, which allows the king to calmly march up to h8. A sample of what could occur: king e5, king h4, rook g7, king h5. Yeah, the problem is I'm looking at these moves and I'm not understanding anything at all. Useful advice: sometimes cutting the defending king off along a rank is as good as cutting it off along a file. I'm sorry guys, but it's too much for me in this moment, because I'm tired, because of many things, because of, you know, my lack of understanding of even simpler positions. This is where I reach my objective limit. Like, I can't understand this in the slightest. So okay, I'm just gonna try to memorize the move to pass the line, and we're gonna move to the bishops because this is just too much for me. So rook to e2. I'm gonna understand it one day. I'm gonna get back and understand it, but now I can't. And I'm very annoyed, believe it or not. I'm extremely annoyed, but what can I do? So rook to e2. King d6 only move. Okay. Useful advice. Sometimes cutting... Yeah, I already read it, but let's read it again. Sometimes cutting the defending king off along a rank is as good as cutting it off along a file. It was referred to that, okay. Rook e4. Otherwise, black just moves his king back and forth between d6 and d5. By defending his pawn with the rook, white hopes to relieve his king of guard duty, which will allow it to march triumphantly down the board. King d5, chasing the rook away from its good position. A major mistake would be king d7, king h4. Now I'm starting to understand, because the pawn was defended. Okay. So, I mean, I understand bits and pieces, but not the full picture. That's the thing. Like, I understood this line, but I don't understand the whole thing. So rook e1, black draws easily after rook a4, king e6. I understand this because it gets closer. The question is, what about king e5? I have no idea. So rook e1, king d6, and white must agree to a draw since he can't make any progress. So what do I have to do to draw this? Sorry. d6, d5. Okay, I'm just gonna go back and forth with the king. Okay. Alright. I haven't understand a single thing. So bishop of opposite colors. Two connected passers, 1. So what time is it? It's early. Okay, it's very early, that's chill. So before going into this, seriously, I'm gonna keep eating some pasta, so I'll have more focus there. Okay, so I have some water here with me, of course, because why not? Water is life, water is everything. Alright, so let me see if you guys can see correctly or not. Seems like you can. Alright. I can do it. Alright, so let's go. So for the first time ever, if I'm not recalling incorrectly, we are going to study an endgame, but starting from the very first position. So this is where things start to be a little bit more perhaps useful and interesting and exciting, because knowing endgames, and this is something I was talking about with a very good friend of mine who is a very strong international master. He's a very strong candidate master. And, I was talking with him about endgames and stuff, and he said that he's very confident in his endgame skills. And indeed, I can guarantee you he's very good at endgames. Well, much better than me, even though that doesn't take much, but he's very good, objectively. And in many situations, when there are like possibilities to simplify pieces or something, we're talking about middle game to end game and stuff, he goes for it, right? Of course, if it's strategically suicide, he doesn't go for it. But, if it's all things considered the same, you rather go for a much more simplified position, because he's very skilled at endgames, right? He has an edge compared to his average opponents. And if you notice, another person that does that, and if you follow Title Tuesday's recaps, he does that all the time. Of course, I'm talking about Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen so many times offered the trade of queens, for example. Insane amount of time. He trades queens like it's nothing. The guy wants the queens out of the board. There is a channel that shows Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura, sometimes Hans Niemann, individual performance in Title Tuesdays, Wednesday Blitz or whatever, Bullet Brawls, those tournaments. And I really enjoy those videos because it's no music, no commentary, it's just the sound of the pieces moving, and you see the whole Magnus Carlsen Title Tuesday, for example, or Hikaru Nakamura Bullet Brawl, or whoever, right? I usually watch Carlsen Title Tuesdays. Again, very enjoyable. And so many times, there is an exciting position, the opponent offers the trade of the queens, or the queens are close to each other but not touching each other, if that makes sense. And I'm so excited, I'm getting so excited, I'm like, oh, Carlsen's gonna attack. And he accepts the trade of queens. Or he offers the trade of queens. Most often, like, almost always forcing it, And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what he does. So many times, dude. He does it all the time. Why? Because he's not afraid of endgames. Not only that, endgames probably excites him. He wants them. Like, that's a superpower, guys. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying a reason why also, and this is, okay, now, what I'm saying here is very, very serious, because I've made some jokes, we talked some lighthearted shenanigans about allergies, and even the talk about allergies was serious, but it's it is what it is. But here I'm really seriously talking about some chess stuff, which is subconsciously, this is something very devious. And again, you have to be honest with yourself and you have to have student mindset. Here we are trying to become masters, never forget that. This is part of the master series, is in the playlist. I put this playlist in that playlist. You need to understand, I have to think a way to put it down. But so many times, I avoid certain moves because they either are directly a trade of pieces or they lead to a potential trade of pieces. And I'm afraid of that, and I am afraid of that, and you guys are afraid of that too. You have to be honest. Again, with you, not with me, but with you have to. We are afraid of that because we don't really truly know how to evaluate the resulting positions. And sometimes maybe we evaluate it correctly and, well, we don't evaluate it correctly, but we think, oh, that leads to simplification, meaning it leads to a draw. But this is the extremely superficial evaluation of a noob. The reality is, less pieces doesn't mean that the result is simple and clear-cutted. As a matter of fact, in these endgames that we are studying, it's objectively a draw. But, for example, previously we saw there's just one way, one move to draw. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it seems like any other move, right? But no, one draws, the other loses. And imagine in more complex endgames, but relatively simplified, meaning endgames, right? Imagine. Just today I was watching this game between Wei Yi and Yakovir Sindarov. Yakovir Sindarov was playing with white pieces, Wei Yi was playing with black pieces. We are talking about the 2025 World Cup final. The tie breaks. I don't remember which game, either the first or the second or whatever, but perhaps the third, I don't know. And they were playing, and it's a bishop endgame, right? And at some point, Wei Yi plays this move G7 to G5, and it's a blunder. It's a draw, right? And then he plays G5, and he had some time. He had like 1 minute or something, right? Which is not a lot, but he's rated 2750, so you have a full minute. And it's a blunder. It goes from 0-0 to like plus 3 or something, because Sindarov is white, so plus 3 is like winning for white. And Sindarov then has a move, which is an obvious move, right? You just have to identify that that's actually winning. And he plays a totally different move, and it's a draw. So they played two crazy blunders. One guy threw the game away, and the other guy didn't win. He threw the advantage back to draw. And in the end, they made a draw. Right? The decisive games were later. But that shows you, and these guys, they were both, it's already a fast game, so 1 minute is not crazy. Crazy is like below 20 seconds. That's really time pressure. But 1 minute is fine, relatively fine. And 2750, 2660 or 80, but of course Sindarov is like 2700 as well. Like two 2700s, one on paper and the other one on fact. They both completely missed that. You know, that's crazy. So don't take it the wrong way. Like, I'm not saying go into an endgame hoping for your opponent to make a mistake. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying don't be afraid to simplify because, it's going to be a draw. No. Just know your endgames. The degree of mistakes that people do in those situations is quite severe. And we're talking grandmaster level, so imagine. Imagine like amateurs and stuff. Like, so, yeah, okay, anyways, let's go. So we're talking about bishops of opposite colors with two connected passers. Okay. One would think that this endgame, bishop and two connected passers versus lone bishop and king, would be an easy win for the two connected passed pawns. However, this simply isn't the case. To illustrate my point, allow me to indulge in a little story. The year was 1978, the city was London, and I was playing my second game with the white pieces in the span of a few months against Jonathan Silman. I had won the first game, and now my opponent was after blood. The opening promised a sharp struggle. So e4, c5, knight f3, d6. Needless to say, we're gonna go through the opening and the middle game very fast, until the comments. d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, bishop g5, knight c6, queen to d2, e6, long castle, as he said, sharp struggle, bishop d7, f4, b5, knight takes c6, bishop takes c6. Now there isn't really an attack here on e4 because the queen will hang, but perhaps bishop takes, knight takes attacks the queen, Bishop takes, knight takes. Maybe there are actually attacks here. At any rate, queen e3, defending the pawn if it was needed. Bishop e7, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, e5. You cannot take with a pawn because you will lose your queen. So bishop e7 back, takes, takes. Now the bishop is pinned to the queen, as you can see from the rook. Knight e4, attacking the bishop, seems like it cannot be defended, so you kind of have to give away this bishop. Now queen takes, notice that this made sure that we are in an opposite color bishop endgame. And here short castle. Here short castle was played. I had prepared this system a year before, and whatever theory I had access to at this time had promised me good chances with bishop d3 threatening checkmate, g6 and now h4 trying to go for an attack. Indeed, it looks dangerous for black, but as I sat there wondering why my opponent exuded an air of confidence, I decided to take a deep look at the position for the first time. Parenthesis, mindlessly memorizing book and exploring a variation seriously are two different things. Okay? Sure enough, after pondering the situation for a long while, I realized that white didn't have anything at all. It occurred to me that after queen f6, rook d to f1, rook f to d8, h5, bishop f8, h takes g6, h takes g6, g4, bishop g7, threatening queen takes b2 check with devastating effects, my opponent's bishop would be very happy on g7, where it would defend the black king while simultaneously eyeing my monarch in a lecherous state of wrath. Years later, the position after h takes g6, h takes g6, g4, bishop g7 did indeed occur with this result: c3, b4, so there is tremendous pressure on the c3 pawn, f5 trying to blast open the king, but e takes f5, g takes f5 and now g5, closing down the king side, and the problem on the queen side remains. And this was actually won by black in Santo Roman against Palak in 2000. So, let's go back to this position here after castle. Rule: opposite color bishops are wonderful attacking weapons in the middle game or in endgames with many pieces remaining, since one bishop can attack something that the other can't defend. Whatever the truth about this line might be, during the game I began to panic, and this led to a cowardly act on my part. So, aside from the endgame lesson that we're gonna learn, I should say the endgame lessons that we're gonna learn, I want to emphasize something, which is like the international master. I don't know if he was international master at the time, but he was definitely a strong player. And the strong player here is like looking at the position, he has a preparation, and he's like, he reaches this position and he doesn't like his preparation, so he has self-doubt. He also memorized things without fully understand. He wasted time, right? He has doubts, and he plays moves that he's not proud of. So that's very inspiring for all of us. You know, like when you play bad moves and you think to yourself, I'm an idiot, I'm not good at chess. These two things, I'm an idiot, I'm not good at chess, these are things that only you decided. They're not real. Because every strong player that existed and will exist did things to which you would have said, I'm a retard, I'm not good at chess, but they became good at chess because they didn't allow those negative thoughts, let's say, to influence them, if you allow me this psychological terminology here. The reality is everyone makes silly mistakes all the time. I just told you, Wei Yi, 2750, just blundered the game away in one move. And Sindarov, super strong young talent, super strong player, he just blundered back the advantage. If this was you, you would say, oh, I'm a retard, I shouldn't play chess, but those guys are like 2700s. And of course, I'm saying you, but I do it myself. I'm more speaking to myself than to you, let's be real. But yeah, let's just enjoy this. And let's just play chess and let's improve, guys. You can become a master. You can truly become a master. And you may say, oh, but I play stupid moves sometimes. Every master have played stupid moves. Masters play stupid moves today while being masters. Other things are more important, like insisting. You know, if you have a goal, insist. Keep pushing. Keep studying. Improve. Keep studying. Work. You'll make it. I'll make it. For sure. Unless I die before, but that's outside of my control. Everything inside of my control, I'll make it, for sure. So anyways, it's almost boring in a way, because you already know you make it. Isn't it crazy? So, whatever the root... okay, I did this cowardly thing. So, queen d4, which attacks this bishop. There is no way to defend it, so you have to move it. So he moved it. And now again, he goes into this endgame, right? He trades even this rook. And now, as you can see, there is an attack on this pawn, so he played g3. Yes, I renounced my manhood and shamelessly played for a draw. Well, that's a big wording. I renounced my manhood is a big phrase in bro, chill out. Sometimes Silman is wild, but of course we all know what he means, right? We all know what he means. But okay, it's tricky here because what Silman is saying is not that this position is a draw necessarily, he's saying that he's playing for a draw. But okay, let's try to evaluate the position with the imbalance thing, right? So there are opposite color bishops. There is a 3 against 2 on the queen side and a 3 against 4 on the king side. And it's an interesting position. Again, we should look at chess not in the engine world, but in the human world. This is an interesting position. Even if it's equal, right, it's still very fascinating. We can study it, we can look at it, and stuff. Okay, so let's see. h5 by Silman. So Silman plays h5, bishop e2 attacks the pawn, h4. Very interesting move. Now, if you take g takes h4, there is bishop takes f4 check, recovering the pawn, and then you're left with a horrible structure. Black would have 2 connected passed pawns, and black would have the edge. Rook d2 also would fall. Terrible, maybe. Okay, so rook to d1 here, ignoring the tension. Since leaving too many pieces on would actually make the bishops of opposite colors useful to black, I made sure to exchange everything that wasn't nailed down. Rule: bishops of opposite colors often give the defender serious drawing chances in the endgame even if he's 1 or 2 pawns behind. So rook takes d1 check, king takes d1. Okay. g5. What's the problem here with g5? Well, the problem is that now, if you take f takes g5, right, after h takes g3, h takes g3, bishop takes g3, there is 1 against 2, so material is still equal, but black is just gonna collect it. And then f2 passed pawns. So, what's going on? And if you play g takes h4... I don't know, I guess you can play many things, but perhaps simple g takes h4 is enough. This pawn is under attack, if you push it, just grab this, but I don't know. So f takes g5 was played, h takes g3, h takes g3. We arrived at the following situation. My opponent was getting a bit excited, no doubt, due to the fact that both my g-pawns were in bad shape. Losing them, and it's also black to move, losing them will lead to 2 black connected passed pawns marching down the board. Was it time for me to get hysterical? Not at all. But this is crazy because it's like he's panicking back here. Like he's panicking back here, where I would get excited, like, there is this, you know. By the way, queen c6 I think is wrong because of bishop takes f4 check. You're actually getting mated. But, you know, he's panicking here, and he's not panicking here, which is just gonna be like 2 pawns down. Not 2 pawns down, sorry, 1 pawn down, but black's gonna have like the 2 connected passers. Like, that's crazy. So my opponent was getting a bit excited, no doubt. Was it time for me to get hysterical? Not at all. So the guy is also strong at endgames here. Why? Because I knew that the situation where black retains the e6 and f7 pawns, and white retains none, a true worst case scenario was that drawn. This is critical, this is so instructive, that's crazy. That's right. If white loses both g pawns and his 3 queenside pawns for black's 2, the game is still a draw. So if everything gets traded off, except for the bishops and these 2 pawns and the king, is still a draw. The extreme position is in the last diagram didn't occur though, and the actual game ended without any adventures. So king g7, a4, b takes a4, bishop takes a6, king g6, bishop b5, bishop takes g3, bishop takes, king takes, king e2, f5, king f3, bishop d6, c3, e5, bishop c2, draw agreed. Okay, so that was very interesting. What time is it though? Yeah, it's almost midnight and it has been 1 hour of recording. Unfortunately, very, very unfortunately, I have to go to sleep because tomorrow I wake up too early. Well, I don't wake up early, I wake up at around 8, but I have to go to sleep now. So thank you guys so much for watching. Very interesting. We're gonna finish the bishops tomorrow, or the next episode, I mean. Sorry, I have to go here. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Enjoy your chess.